Good afternoon, guys. This is Joe Keefe coming to you from southern Maine here in Sanford, Maine, and I just wanted to start this podcast really to talk about my passion, which is fishing here in the state of Maine. And hopefully, as time goes on, the podcast can grow. I'll, of course, meet up with other fellow anglers, friends, like-minded folks, just to talk about fishing. There might be a little bit of hunting sprinkled in there, a little bit of just shooting the shit. So hopefully you enjoy this. I want to start off the first episode here of my new podcast just by talking about a local river here in the Sanford area, Kennebunk and Acton, which is the Mousam River. So the Mousam River is almost 30 miles long, and it goes all the way from Acton and the Shapley area down through to the ocean in Kennebunk. So I believe that it's one of the most heavily dammed rivers in Maine. There's 13 dams. I don't know if they're all working and what the shape is of all those dams, but it is one of the most heavily dammed rivers in all of Maine. The reason that I love the Mousam River and that I fish it is because I moved down here about 9 years ago when my wife my wife got pregnant, and she wanted to be closer to her parents, who at the time lived in Shapley, Maine. So I found myself attracted to the river, going down there when I had a spare hour or half hour just to say, hey, honey, I'll be right back. I'm just going to go down to the river and try casting a little bit. So I grew up fishing a ton with my grandfather, my uncles, and maybe in a future podcast I'll go through kind of where I fell in love with fishing in general. But yeah, the Mousam River, I started adventuring in the Shapley and Sanford area, which is kind of up near Mousam Lake, close to the dam. And a lot of the time that I spent there was just casting with nothing happening. Trying different spots, finding areas where there were, suckers. There's a good population of suckers and shiners. And then eventually I found the stocking times. So the spring and the fall in Maine, the Inland Fishery and Wildlife Department, they go around with the stocking trucks and they stock brown trout and brook trout in the Mousam River. So one of the first times I caught a bunch of brook trout and a few brown trout was just after the stocking truck had dumped them in at an area that I was fishing, and I didn't know. So it's always these times where you feel like, I did something right. I'm an amazing fisherman. You go home and you think, let me check the stocking report. Sure enough, they had just stocked it the previous week with, 500 brook trout. So I believe each spring and fall in a total, I believe there's thousands of fish put into the Mousam River from brown trout to brook trout. So I've caught a bunch of small, recently stocked trout in the river. But now that my son Jack has gotten older, he's 8 years old now, we have found that in the late spring and summer months, the bass fishing in the Mousam River is amazing. And I know there's a lot of trout, salmon guys in Maine, and I love trout and salmon fishing. It's my favorite, okay? However, when you're fishing with a kid and you have a river right by your house that gets really warm in the summertime, it doesn't really support cold water fisheries that well. The brown trout seem to hold up a lot better than the brook trout, of course. So you'll find those throughout even the summer months in dam pools and where have you. But the bass fishing, from my perspective in the Mousam River, is some of the best bass fishing that you can find throughout the state. Because not only are there largemouth in the river, there are smallmouth in the river, and they fight so hard. Because they're bass and because they're river fish, or a fish that's coming up from a pond into a river, they're always swimming up, against the stream, sometimes hanging out in the slack water. When they get surprised and they get hooked, they put up one of the best fights that you can find in a freshwater fish, outside of probably a salmon, something like that. So the bass fishing me and my son Jack have ran into is just so fun and exciting. You can go down, the water takes a while to warm up because it's a river, and depending on the season, this year the bass didn't really quite show up in a few of our spots until I'd say the beginning of June, middle of June. So when that warm weather really starts setting in, the bass start coming around, moving out of their areas from the winter time, whether they were in a pond or in a deep hole, and moving into shallower waters and kind of moving around the river looking for creek chub, suckers, or minnows. There's the population of shiners and minnows in Mousam Lake and the Mousam River. They're everywhere. All you have to do is go down to the rec area where all the kids swim, and you'll see shiners and minnows everywhere. And just not too far behind them, you'll find a little juvenile bass chasing them around too. So it's pretty cool stuff. But the Mousam River has fantastic smallmouth and largemouth fishery that in the middle of June all the way to the beginning of September, middle of September, can be really awesome. After that, it kind of shuts off. And before that, in May, in April, they won't bite. They're still kind of locked up, still really lethargic from the cold weather that we have here in Maine all winter and the fall. At that time, in the fall, we can switch to targeting those brown trout. So what I've found is that the brown trout fishing in the Mousam River is pretty awesome as well. There are specific areas, just like any river, where you're going to find a lot more than others. And of course, it's populated healthily by a restocking each fall of juvenile brown trout. However, there are some brown trout in the Mousam River that are massive. And I'm talking 25-inch plus, okay? And you might think I'm lying, but I caught this year for the first time. I've been fishing down there, like I said, for about 9 years. I caught a 26-inch brown trout out of the Mousam River on April 1st, what we consider opening day open water fishing here in southern Maine. The Mousam River as well is actually one of the rivers that's open year-round. So you can fish that river, January 1st all the way to December 31st, but you better have some waders on if you're going to come anywhere near the water in those cold winter months. So yeah, there are some massive brown trout in the river that travel, like I said, from Shapley all the way down to the ocean in Kennebunk, past Route 1, where the water spills right into the salt there in Kennebunk. And from my understanding, I spent some time at LL Bean in Freeport, Maine, talking with an older gentleman who 25 years ago spent a ton of time fly fishing the saltwater and freshwater area where they meet in Kennebunk, fishing for sea-run brown trout. So the Mousam River, to my understanding, has a great population of sea-run brown trout, which I saw in the beginning of the summer, folks catching a healthy amount of sea run brown trout out in the ocean while fishing for stripers. So not far, off of the mouth of the rivers here in York County, landing a few. I saw at least 5 or 6 people that posted them online. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't post them online that caught a bunch as well. So you can go down to the park area down in Kennebunk, right off Route 1. I believe it's on Water Street. And you will find a nice area where you'll have to have waders once again because the water's frigid cold in late September, October, November, and fish for sea run brown trout. The gentleman at El Bean told me that they come in that river in October and November. I'm going to try to fish it hard this fall and see if I can, get my hands on a sea run brown trout, or maybe if I can just even hook up to one, let alone put my hands on one. Probably let it just go and keep it in the water in the net. So that's another great part of the Mousam River, is that you can fish for sea run brown trout. You can fish for largemouth, smallmouth bass. You can find brook trout after they've been stocked, and probably within the winter months, wherever there's ice, where you can ice fish. Because yes, above the dams, people do go out and ice fish on the Mousam River, and they catch large brown trout, they catch brook trout, they catch bass. The cool thing about the Mousam River too is, like I said, it's almost 30 miles long. So there's 13 dams. All of those dam pools provide, fishing, for perch, sunfish, suckers, bass, with the surprise trout sitting in there as well. My favorite right now in the middle of summer, as I'm recording this, is targeting the largemouth and smallmouth bass that are down in the river right now. They put up a heck of a fight, and my son Jack just loves reeling in these fish, taking a nice cool picture and sending it into the Big Old Fish news channel site, where I think he told me the other day he's been on there 5 years in a row. So targeting those bass with my son is something I'm sure I'll never forget. We found this great fishery, and it all came just from exploring the river. Sitting around the house after work and thinking, I've got an hour. My wife, bless her, she'd always say, yeah, go ahead, and I'd go wander down to the river and try different spots all the time, and eventually we figured out a few different spots where we can find fish. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that I found a 26-inch brown trout on April 1st this year, and that is a fish that a lot of people would think maybe he's lying. Maybe it was 22 inches. There's no way it was 26 inches. 26-inch fish. Didn't get a weight on it. I'd say it was 6 pounds, maybe. I had fished in this area probably 30, 40 times, and caught nothing but maybe small little bass. A lot of anglers, neighbors, people at bait shops had told me that in the fall, people fish down in this area and they catch brown trout of nice size. My neighbor, my previous neighbor, had told me to fish down in this area. He'd always say, some real nice browns down there. Some real nice browns down there. So I never forgot that. So on April 1st, I threw on my waders because the water's cold and I wanted to get a little bit further out in the river so I could cast out in the middle, get a little bit deeper water. And I threw on a little gold bullet spinner. So if anyone knows, I had a gold spinner, and the middle of the lure looks like a bullet. and it's got a treble hook on it. So I was down there casting for maybe 10 minutes, no longer than 10 minutes, when I look down, and I always watch my lure whenever I can see it once it becomes visible, whether it's 10 or 15 feet from me. I always check to see if there's anything following my lure, because I've seen fish swim in, as most anglers have, chase your lure all the way in and then just kind of turn around and go away from it. I looked down, and this lure was probably 6 feet from my feet, and there was a giant brown trout behind my lure. And all I had to do was pause for 2 seconds and stop reeling, and right when that lure stopped spinning, he hit it. And I set the hook, and I pulled that fish in and walked him up onto the beach and took a few nice pictures of this 26-inch brown trout that I had caught down in the Mousam River. Amazing fish, looked so beautiful, big black with red halos, spots, black spots with red halos, had a nice gold yellow tint to the side of the fish and a big hook jaw. Beautiful fish. So I'll be going down probably every April 1st, as long as I live down in this area, and looking for brown trout there. I did cast for another 15 minutes or so, and actually got a few more bites, but no hookups. So I'll be definitely going back there, 100%. I've also taken my son swimming down in the Mousam River. So again, if you have kids, it's a great area where you can go down swimming and fishing at the same time. I know a lot of people kind of frown against that, but I've caught fish plenty of times while my son is swimming, in the river. You can cast most poles they sell. You can cast a lot further out in the river and have your son or your daughter splash around a little bit while you're catching fish. Obviously, if you're targeting brookies or something a little bit more finicky, maybe not. But hey, bring the kid along, let him swim a little bit, as long as they're not throwing rocks. I've always given my son a hard time about that. Quit splashing. So I'll be doing that every April. And then, like I said, this October into November, I'm going to bring my fly rod out. I'm going to head down to Kennebunk, and I'm going to fish the salt area and look for those sea run brown trout as well. It's an amazing river. Doesn't get talked about a lot because in Maine we've got the Penobscot, the Kennebec, Sebec, Piscataquis, the Saco, the Presumpscot. We've got so many other rivers, the West Outlet, what have you. I rarely hear about people talking about the Mousam River unless it's me. So occasionally online I'll post that it's down at the Mousam River just to show it some love, because it's a great fishery. It does get really warm in the summertime, unfortunately, but like I said, there's 13 dams, and there's a lot of dam pools that hold some cold water throughout the summertime. I personally don't know how long they should keep stocking brook trout there in the Mousam River because it gets so warm, but the brown trout seem to hold up pretty well. It'd be interesting for me to see if they switched over from brook trout to rainbow trout, and see if maybe putting some rainbows in there would maybe they'd hold up a little bit more than the brook trout. So the brook trout are just very sensitive fish. So that's my little tutorial of the Mousam River, place I wanted to share with you guys on my first podcast episode. Like I said, I wanted to do this podcast to talk a little bit about fishing, get together with some buddies in the future, maybe by the lake or by the river, and do some podcasts out in the woods, which we'll do coming up here. Like I said, it's August, so we still got plenty of time here. I'll be heading up. My father has a camp in Greenville, Maine, so I'll be heading up to the fly-in for the Seaplane Fly-In show up on Moosehead Lake, and maybe I'll do a podcast up there with my cousins. They love talking about fishing. Christian, Jacob, what's up, boys? And yeah, just share the love of the outdoors. Maine is such a beautiful place that I feel like I need to talk about it a little bit more. I'm not a guide. I don't have a huge investment where I want to attract people to come to Maine. In fact, we kind of like it the way it is up here. So I just wanted to shed light and maybe see if other people like the topics. Feel free in the comments to ask questions. Maybe in the future podcast episodes, I can answer some fan questions or just questions from folks that are curious about Maine in general. I believe on the next episode, tune in. I'm going to talk a little bit about my childhood, what got me into fishing, a little bit about my grandfather, Larry the Legend. And yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about the Mousam River. And if you're ever in the area, bring your fishing pole. All right, and get ready. Thanks so much, guys. Until next time.